Personally, it's rather difficult to do anything. Clearly, the ball is in the court of the European Union. And my point has always been, and continues to be, that the European Union is not about money. I mean, that's why I dislike the kind of debate on, well, do we get more money from Russia, or do we get more from the customs union, or do we get more money from the European Union? It has nothing to do with money. The money follows from the EU side, in the sense of you get more investments, you get assistance, and all kinds of things. But that isn't the point of the European Union. The point of the European Union is actually to foster and develop and maintain a community of common values, and as I said, they're based on democracy, human rights, rule of law. I mean, that you don't get good capitalism without rule of law, because you need courts that are trusted. You don't have wise leadership if you don't have free and fair elections. And you're basically, if you don't respect human rights, you're just not part of the European community. In the broader sense, not just the European Union, but I mean, what defines Europeanness? I mean, the concept of human rights was developed basically in Europe, and then has been successfully exported all over the world as something that works. And so, I mean, the choice of Ukraine to opt for Europe is, I mean, the so-called European choice is actually, what does that mean? If you deconstruct that term means precisely three pillars of the European Union, which is, again, democracy, human rights, and rule of law. What we can do for that, I mean, that was what the whole idea was. The association agreement would have gone a long way to promote all of those, and that is fundamentally where the support would have come from, is institution building. Without human rights, democracy, and rule of law, you cannot have strong institutions. And if you look at all of the countries that have done well, the key issue has been the quality of the institutions. But you don't have, if you don't have rule of law, that means you don't have good courts. In other words, the court system is not effective. It's a bad institution if you don't have good courts. If you don't have free and fair elections, if there's cheating in the election, you're not going to have strong belief in the government and in the country. If you don't respect human rights, then you're not going to have any of the institutions in the country being trustworthy. So, I mean, that is the key to development. And I can say that if you don't do those things, then that's the foundation of everything that includes getting rich. Now, some countries in the world, they sit on top of oil, so they can ignore this. But unless you're sitting on oil, you cannot ignore the issue of the quality of institutions and precisely those three pillars I keep mentioning. Where I'm disappointed, and I said this, is that the countries that have been most supportive of Ukraine, and that's Sweden, the three Baltic countries, and the Visegrad countries, and then later on also Germany. We're not a majority in the European Union. It's not as if Europe is on its knees saying we really want Ukraine. Basically, most of the countries, or sort of the majority of the population, is far more worried about other areas, other neighbors, primarily those south of Europe, and so there's honestly quite a bit of skepticism about Ukraine anyway on the part of some of the members of the European Union, and so now we're actually sort of between two places. Ukraine has disappointed us all, and our friends within the European Union are saying, "We told you so."
I say this, but this night things happened in the first time in the modern Ukrainian history after independence. People were shot. So, and there is a huge anxiety about the possible crackdown and further violence. What these days can be done by the European Union, by the other countries to stop it or to prevent?
Well, I mean, I think you heard it in the discussion today from a fairly high level. I can't really say it in their names because it's Chatham House rules, but I mean, basically, stop the violence. Stop the violence. I mean, you know, when you have a violent response to any kind of protest, all that does, it leads to escalation, and then the situation gets out of control. I'll put it this way, you know, if you 1993, Samuel Huntington wrote a book called The Clash of Civilizations, and then he drew a map of Europe, through Europe, between two different civilizations, European and non-European. And everywhere it followed national borders, except for Ukraine, where it split Ukraine in half. And he makes the rather dire prediction that this could be a major problem. Now, I want Samuel Huntington to be wrong. I mean, he was right in a lot of things. I think he's wrong on Ukraine. I mean, it's ultimately a choice of Ukraine, whether or not this spirals, the violence spirals. But it's a clear demand of the European Union. It was said by Cathy Ashton today already, who's the head of EU foreign policy. She condemned completely the killings and demanded an end to it. And I think that is virtually everyone in Europe is demanding an immediate cessation of violence. What happens after that? Well, then that's for Ukrainians to decide how you proceed. I mean, but again, then we get back to the whole issue of rule of law. Do you trust the courts? I mean, this is why the fundamentals have to be there.
But the United States, for instance, has some kind of sanctions. What is a chance, or Mr. Bild also raised this issue. What is your position on that, and what can be done about targeted sanction against those who can be responsible?
Well, they have to be targeted first and foremost, because we cannot punish Ukrainians for something they didn't do. I mean, what is the standard path? I mean, people can't are denied visas. Foreign accounts can be frozen. I mean, I think that may be a very short-term solution, but in the long term, I mean, it doesn't really lead very far. I mean, ultimately, the president of Belarus, who can't travel anywhere to Europe, doesn't really care.
And what the business can do, also the European business.
Well, European business already is scared by developments in Ukraine before the violence yesterday, and in fact has been highly dubious about staying in Ukraine, and the called de-investment in Ukraine is actually a serious problem because companies do not feel that they can get a fair deal there.
Okay, and the final one. Do you think that Europe should talk to Russia? And what can be the communication with Russia regarding this stopping the violence?
Some people might do that, but we have a principle that if you have bilateral issues, you deal with them bilaterally, and certainly I would not be in favor of giving any third country a droit de garde, privileged position discussing the bilateral relations between Europe and Ukraine. I think the idea of actually negotiating Ukraine's association agreement together with a third country is completely ridiculous.
We talk not about the negotiation, but a particular crisis which is happening now. That was a matter of...
I don't think the record's really great. I don't know what they're talking about Syria, but I don't really think the record's really great. And I think it's fundamentally a bad idea.